As a matter of fact, I would ask you, are you a God-fearing Christian?
I'm going to give it to you if you hold your breath, just for a moment. I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
Mr. Goodman quoted the Archbishop of Canterbury. The honourable gentleman from Hertford seems to be the Archbishop of Kant.
Which side of the room are you coming from now?
Mr. Falwell, I am delighted to meet you, a man whom I have always regarded as the Reverend Ian Paisley of the Sunbelt.
Reverend Falwell, Prime Minister Lange.
Great Confrontations at the Oxford Union. The series continues. Tonight, the motion that nuclear weapons are morally indefensible. The principal speakers are Prime Minister David Lange of New Zealand and Reverend Jerry Falwell from the United States.
You have the hide to come here and say that New Zealand stance is somehow threatening the strength of the West in Geneva.
We and all others who believe as deeply as we do would rather die on our feet than to live on our knees.
Good evening. Welcome to the Oxford Union, the world-famous debating society, where tonight one of the most important issues of our time will be debated here. With us tonight, and eminently qualified to comment on the proceedings here, is a former president of the Oxford Union, a former ambassador to the United States from Great Britain, a journalist and a television broadcaster, Mr. Peter Jay. Good evening, Peter. It looks like it's going to be a fine debate.
I think it's going to be very exciting indeed. I think perhaps what people will need to know are the rules for debate here. It's really like a debate anywhere. The president will call somebody to propose this motion, then he calls the speaker on the other side to oppose, and then it goes back and forth, to and fro, for the rest of the debate. One important point that I think people should know is that while a speaker is speaking, anybody in the House has a right to rise to his feet with a view to asking a question or making an interjection or raising a point of fact. It's then up to the speaker who has the floor to decide whether or not he will give way to that person, let him put his question or make his point, or whether he prefers to go on with the point that he is making.
At the end of the debate, people cast their votes by leaving the chamber through one of two doors, one for the ayes and the other for the noes. Their votes determine the outcome of the debate.
When Prime Minister Lange denied port access to this United States ship, presumed to be nuclear, the trouble with the U.S. began.
We do consider the denial of port access as a matter of grave concern, which goes to the core of our mutual obligation as allies.
It's our deepest hope that New Zealand will restore the traditional cooperation that has existed between our two countries. Allies must work together as partners to meet their shared responsibilities.
New Zealand, I am as disappointed as you are in the approach taken by the New Zealand Prime Minister. He's very much aware of my views.
The United States became worried that Lange would become a kind of Pied Piper of pacifist countries.
Well, I think it sets a very bad precedent. I think that you'll see consequences flowing to possibly Australia, possibly to Japan and other regions.
Some Western countries have anti-nuclear and other movements which seek to diminish defense cooperation among the allied states. We would hope that our response to New Zealand would signal that the course these movements advocate would not be cost-free.
New Zealanders, however, have a different view of the world.
We are not some sort of industrial trash heap. We tend to have a good climate. We tend to have healthy, active, sporting people, and we have, in fact, built up the cult of wholesomeness. We like to breathe fresh air. We have a sky which is unsmogged. And really, nuclear weapons are the ultimate extension of everything that you ever wanted to see in a trash can or a morgue. And New Zealanders have said, the devil with it. We're just not going to have it.
I brought him over to vote for me tonight.
Yeah, how many more troops did you bring?
That's it.
Tonight's antagonists come from different worlds. One, a Bible-thumping American Southerner, the other, a populist Labour leader from down under. And each speaks with religious conviction.
There's some things worse than war, and one of them is the loss of our liberties and our freedoms. And I think there's 200 years of history in this country to indicate that Christians, while always opposed to war, and certainly opposed to nuclear weapons, also are opposed to slavery and are doing all they can at this time in history to support the president, a man who's taking a clear stand for peace through strength and a clear
Both, as it turns out, are ministers. Falwell the Baptist, Lange the Methodist.
Do you think that the Prime Minister of New Zealand's position is defensible in turning away U.S. ships because we wouldn't identify them?
Well, he certainly has the right to do that. He's an autonomous nation. I think it is short-sightedness. I think it's rather juvenile.
He said that he believes that your position in this particular matter is juvenile and not well thought through.
Oh, what would you expect him to say? He flew across the Atlantic to oppose me. You'd have to think of something. I don't think it's a very bright idea what he's thought of.
We are training women for activism in politics, activism in government.
I'm backing President Reagan. I can't be wrong. He's a born-again disarmer.
I'm afraid, despite what the press might want to happen tonight, we are now going to go to dinner. So, could all those for dinner and for the buffet please go upstairs in the Macmillan dining room? There's a seating plan, and those in the buffet, it is just on the left in the Gladstone room.
I thought you lived in Bangkok.
I did.
You did? Ah, see. Oh, it's glad to see you. He does.
Good to meet you, yes. And they're all going like this, sort of.
Some of these students queuing here tonight gave U.S. Defense Secretary Weinberger a victory here last year. But recently, student votes have tilted against the U.S.
The chair to the President.
I would like to say a special thank you to the Reverend Jerry Falwell from flying over from the United States of America, and to David Lange, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, from flying all the way over from New Zealand, especially for this debate. Many thanks indeed.
The first speaker is a New Zealander, Miss Jaya Wilson, who plans to enter politics in New Zealand when she leaves Oxford. She will propose the motion.
Tonight is a momentous occasion because we have what has been dubbed the David and Goliath encounter. On this St. David's Day, we have David, the Right Honourable David Lange, Prime Minister of New Zealand and a Methodist lay preacher, and the Reverend Jerry Falwell, leader of the moral majority, and like yourself, Mr. President, a Goliath of a theologian. Also tonight, it is perhaps appropriate that this motion that all nuclear weapons are morally indefensible is being debated in a New Zealand context, because it was a New Zealander, Lord Rutherford, who in Cambridge first split the atom, thus making possible the development of nuclear weapons. And for that effort, he was awarded an honorary doctorate by Oxford. But we need not fear the nuclear war if one is to happen. Because our guest tonight, Mr. Falwell, has given us the assurance in his booklet, Nuclear War and the Second Coming, that true Christians around the world will disappear, vanished from the face of the earth 7 years before nuclear war. In the meantime, Mr. President, the rest of us are lulled into a sense of complacency, believing that we can sleep safe because nuclear deterrence has kept Europe at peace for 40 years. Over the past few weeks, one small nation has shown the qualities that have made your great nation, Mr. Falwell, great. A democratic will, determination, and moral fortitude. Yet when the tables are turned, a country of 70 million sheep and 3/4 million humans stand accused of naivety, selfishness, and moral turpitude. What is conveniently forgotten is that back in 1972, the then Prime Minister of New Zealand, Norman Kirk, stated that New Zealand should find and hold a firm moral basis for its foreign policy. It is that tradition of moral conviction which lives on today and I, for one, am proud to be a New Zealander. It's not for nothing. It's not for nothing, Mr. President, that we say that the Brits may have class, but the Kiwi has polish. Mr. President.
And that was J.O. Wilson, who proposed the motion. A very fine student speech, I would say. She is, of course, a postgraduate at St. Antony's College. Described herself there at the end as a Kiwi, which is the friendly nickname used in Britain for New Zealanders. She is, of course, a New Zealander, and she's planning to go back to New Zealand and enter politics. If her performance tonight was anything to go by, I think she will have a very interesting future back home. And now we come to the next speaker, who is going to be the principal opposer of the motion, Anthony Goodman, called here the ex-librarian. That means he used to hold the office of librarian in the society. He comes from New College. And here's Mr. Goodman.
Devastation, destruction, chaos, the complete breakdown of communications, the aftermath of J.O. Wilson's speech. Accurate as always, Miss Wilson. I have to admit there are some very dodgy characters on this side of the House. There's that complete moral reprobate, the Pope. He's in favour of deterrence. That villainous viper, the Archbishop of Canterbury. He's in favour of deterrence. The notorious thug, the Chief Rabbi, and I couldn't leave him out, could I? He's in favour of deterrence. I tell you this, it's a damn good thing Stephen Hellman's on your side, or we'd have a complete monopoly of ethical lepers over here. To paraphrase a famous Americanism, nuclear weapons don't kill people, people kill people. The question I want to ask the proposition tonight is what is so special about nuclear weapons that makes them alone so immoral? Why aren't all weapons immoral? Can you spot the moral difference between nuclear weapons and chemical weapons? Can you spot the moral difference between nuclear weapons and bombs and bullets and blades? 50 million people died in the Second World War, slaughtered by conventional weaponry. Spot the moral difference. 20 million people died since the Second World War, slaughtered by conventional weapons. Spot the moral difference. Many can remember the picture of the Vietnamese girl fleeing from her devastated village, her flesh burnt by napalm, her face blistered and cracked. Could she spot the moral difference? Can you? Well, I'll tell you what the moral difference is. The Archbishop of Canterbury said, principle is not the exclusive possession of those who are attracted to large gestures. Mr. Lange's policy is a large gesture. This motion is a large gesture. But it is also an impotent and basically an immoral gesture. If a readiness to use nuclear weapons is the price we have to pay to cut the risk of nuclear war, to prevent Soviet expansionism and nuclear threat, and to safeguard the freedom and liberties of the West, then that is a price I am prepared to pay. That is the moral choice to make. That is the moral difference I beg to oppose.
That was Anthony Goodman, a fine student speaker. Peter, how did you read that? What marks do you give it?
Well, the motion's now been well and truly proposed and opposed, and the debate's off and running. I would say that Goodman's speech was much more of a normal undergraduate speech, the kind of speeches that have been made in this hall for over 100 years. It wasn't quite as distinguished or polished or sophisticated, I think, as J.O. Wilson's proposing the motion, but nonetheless he deployed most of the solid arguments, laid out the groundwork, and of course there'll be many other speakers on the opposition side following through to fill in any holes that he left.
What we have failed to consider tonight are the real consequences of the possession of weapons felt by the small nations and by the developing nations in our world. Nuclear weapons, Mr. President, have polarized the world into East and West, have divided us into two armed camps, each side with sufficient destructive capability to eradicate the other. So far, this mutually assured destructive power has prevented the superpowers from directly attacking each other. Instead, they have waged their wars indirectly. They have waged their wars in the third world, in the small countries who are defenseless against the machinations of the superpowers, who play this game of chess with small countries as their pawns. It is these countries who are paying the price for nuclear weapons and for the ensuing superpower rivalry. I beg to propose.
We cannot stop the world and hope to get off, as the other side would have it tonight. Mr. Goodman quoted the Archbishop of Canterbury. The honourable gentleman from Hertford seems to be the Archbishop of Cant, because what we heard from him tonight was a speech which didn't really face the issues. Because what we need with multilateral disarmament is maintaining the readiness for war while following every avenue for peace. Our commitment to NATO and to nuclear deterrence must be absolute, because without it, the Warsaw Pact would never take us seriously and would never seek to negotiate with us on the question of nuclear weapons. Is it not now fundamentally destabilising to throw away the nuclear deterrent which has kept the peace in Europe since 1945, despite what Miss Wilson tried to say, because of the fear on both sides of nuclear destruction? What is the morality in taking steps which destabilise, imbalance and make arms agreements more difficult? What is the morality in saying that all nuclear weapons are indefensible and yet sheltering behind the umbrella of a nuclear alliance? And what is the morality in taking measures which undermine the confidence, the friendship and the trusts of nations which are supposedly united in the search for peace? It was Teddy Roosevelt's maxim, Theodore Roosevelt's maxim when he was President of the United States at the turn of the century: speak softly and carry a big stick. Mr. Lange's maxim and the maxim of those on the other side seems to be speak loudly and carry no stick at all. The way forward is to negotiate, the way forward is a dialogue, the way forward is to talk, not to throw things away and hope that something which might possibly, perhaps in some time improve the world, but may possibly not. That is the risk the other side take. They are gambling with our future, and that's why we should oppose the motion tonight. I beg to oppose.
The wording of tonight's motion brings a whole new slant to the issue. To call nuclear weapons, any nuclear weapons, moral under any circumstances is clearly a perversion of all the word moral stands for. So let's get back to basics. Just what does the opposition tonight believe? They believe that the possession of weapons capable of mass destruction is justifiable in terms of morality. Are the opposition here tonight convinced that nuclear weapons will never be used? In other words, does the Reverend Falwell believe that bluff is morally acceptable but nuclear war immoral? Or will he tell the House tonight that the nuclear war and ensuing destruction is morally acceptable under some conditions? You'll remember that President Reagan made his position quite clear on this issue. He told us that he believed that, quote, it was possible to fight a limited nuclear war in Europe. Or perhaps to be fair to him, he only sometimes believes that because he said 2 days later that he had, quote, misspoke, and that it was not possible to fight a limited nuclear war in Europe. A dangerous couple of days for us all, you'll agree. Well, nuclear war is unjustifiable under all circumstances, whether it's a first strike, which we've always said that we were prepared to use in the event of losing a conventional war, or as a retaliatory strike. Because we could not win that war if we retaliated with nuclear weapons. We could not preserve our way of life, and therefore that retaliatory strike would be for one reason alone: vindictiveness. And if that's turning the other cheek, then I'd like the Reverend Falwell to defend it. What, of course, is the most disturbing fact of all is that some of the armors of our Western democracies they show a deep relish for the prospect of the final showdown against godlessness. Mr. Falwell may tell us that he loves his enemy, but there again, he's a Christian, seemingly prepared to love while accepting that there may come a time when that friend must be obliterated in a nuclear holocaust. All in all, Mr. Speaker, I'd rather not be loved. I beg to move the motion.
Mr. President, I oppose this motion, but I come to the House tonight not fully at peace with my opposition to it. We live in a kingdom of people and not a kingdom of God. Our lesson is still the one of the great religious disputation of the early centuries AD, and the question was put, would it have been better if man had not been created? And the answer came, it would have been better. But since he has, he had better look to it. The existence of nuclear weapons in the West does not in and of itself nullify all that we have stood for. I am no proponent of an us and them mentality, of evil empire pronouncements. But one not need see everything to see that nations encourage abroad what they encourage at home, not see further than Iran and Libya and the Soviet Union to realize that it is not all the same in this world. I'm not predicting a particular threat. I need not do that. All I suggest to you tonight is this proposition you are asked to support is very permanent. The disadvantage we would face is absolute against any enemy at any time willing to use its nuclear force, or for that matter chemical or biological, when it is developed to a point where it can kill the entire world. Our self-defense would be impossible. Our quandary in here is not so much in the nuclear problem as in the state of our technology. We are simply too good at enforcing our will. But it cannot be the moral course to withdraw from the moral arena. A couple of years ago, Max Beloff, the ex-secretary, rose visibly shaken to address this House for a second time on the question of king and country. He rose and he said that he had never been dressed as ex-secretary for 50 years, but he knew now that he owed it to one man who spoke on the same side of the chamber that night, who had beaten him to the presidency, R.W. Shabir, who was on that plaque, a man who died fighting. I rise, he said, 50 years later, to atone for his death. There is something ineffably sad about any one of us rising in this House to speak and choose on one side or the other between two horrible choices. But a sense of moral right is all that we have, and that is commendable, Mr. Lange, I believe that. All I ask is a doubt, a practical doubt. So against the risk posed by deterrence, weigh these risks and see if you can come up with no possible situation where we can support our threat. Weigh the risk of large-scale conventional war, now perhaps fought with chemical and biological weapons, deterred for years because the threat of expansion was deterred by the threat of a nuclear force. Weigh the possibility that that conventional war will escalate to a nuclear war because smaller nations whom we cannot control, once the genie of nuclear arms have been taken out of the bottle, do not listen to what we decide tonight. For a vocabulary of morality, war is the hardest place, and nuclear war shatters all of our conceptions of a theory of just war. That we should be, for all our causes, forced to threaten what we do is horrible. And we say to all those people who force us to use our nuclear weapons, as Golda Meir said, we can forgive you that you hate us. We can even forgive you that you kill our sons and daughters. But what we can never forgive is that you make our sons and daughters kill you. Who we cannot forgive is ourselves. With annihilation, the price, no cause is worth it. But it is emphatically not the case that there is no risk of nuclear war that we would not risk for some cause. Only risks on both sides. We're left with no guarantees. We know so very little about how what moral decisions we make now will affect our lives in the future. In the end, it's not the machines that continue to threaten, even after we have agreed that we will not morally use nuclear weapons. In the end, it is this. If we are scared, it is because we are scary. Mr. President, I wish to oppose this motion.
Now we come to the big moment of the evening, the speeches by the two heavyweights. First of all, the New Zealand Prime Minister,
Mr. Lange, who will be followed by the Reverend Falwell. Mr. Lange comes to the dispatch box, and the House on both sides is rising to him. That is a very, very rare event in the Oxford Union. I'm not sure in the 25 years since I was president I've ever seen that happen here in this historic hall before. But he is having a most enthusiastic reception. Not quite everybody is on their feet, but very large numbers. And it's on both sides of the House. It's a mark of courtesy and respect, as well as in some cases support for his views. Here is the Prime Minister.
Honourable members of the Union, ladies and gentlemen, in fact, if I could greet straight away, because I understand there is a direct feed to the White House tonight, if I could greet the President of the United States, who is, of course, at the very genesis of the proposition we're debating tonight. A quote in Time magazine last year, an assertion by the President of the United States that nuclear weapons were immoral. His avowal reiterated in January this year in the statement over the space initiative known as SDI. And there again, he asserted that this system of the nuclear stir-up cannot be sustained morally. If I could say very simply that it is my conviction that there is no moral case for nuclear weapons, I accept and do not wish to be heard arguing here against any proposition that the state must arm itself with military force to protect its citizens against aggression, or defend the weak and the helpless against aggression. But I do not accept that the state must, for those reasons, arm itself with nuclear weapons. That is a case I do not easily or lightly make in Europe. Those governments are faced with the close presence of an alien and relentlessly oppressive regime, and obviously feel it their duty to prepare for their own defence by membership in what, for most governments' policy now, is straightforwardly a nuclear alliance. That is an assessment I understand, and I do not come here to argue for any proposition in favour of unilateral disarmament. My contention is very simply that the character of nuclear weapons is such that it is demonstrably the case that they subvert the best of intentions, and the snuggling up to the nuclear arsenal which has gone on with my friends on the opposite side tonight show at what level of elegance, sophistication and refinement that subversion takes place. There is, Mr. President, a quality of irrationality about nuclear weapons which does not sit well with good intentions. A system of defence serves its purpose if it guarantees the security of those it protects. A system of nuclear defence guarantees only insecurity. The means of defence terrorise as much as the threat of attack. In Europe, it is impossible to be unaware of the intensity of military preparedness. In New Zealand, the visitor must make an effort to find a military installation, or indeed any sign of military activity, although it does exist. There is no imperative in New Zealand to prepare for war. The result is that I feel safer in Wellington than I ever could in London or New York or Oxford. The fact is that Europe and the United States are ringed about with nuclear weapons, and your people have never been more at risk. The argument advanced here tonight, the 50 million killed over 4 years by concerted war in a conventional sense in Europe, and the argument that somehow the existence of this mutually assured destruction phenomenon has since that time preserved this planet from destruction. It is, I think, probably an example of Northern Hemisphere or European arrogance that we overlook now the 30 million people in this world who have died in wars since then, while we are apparently beset from the two superpowers by a system designed to have people stop killing each other. I believe that the fear they inspire is not a justification for their existence.
Sir, the one area of the world that you refer to that has had no casualties is that area defended by nuclear deterrence, namely Europe. Not one of those 30 million lived in Europe.
Have you considered the proposition for one moment that that war that cost those casualties might have entrenched within people the yearning for peace, the growth of democratic institutions, the accountability of political representatives, so that none wishes to wage, conventional or nuclear terms, any war? Why attribute to the presence of that awesome potential clash of firepower a stability which your politicians have been arguing they created? You can't have it both ways. Either you are having a new united Europe marching to glory and to the exclusion of certain primary production from other countries, or you've had it there simply because you had counterpoised this terrible means of destruction. I want to pass up, yeah.
What I should like to know, sir, is why you don't do the honorable and the consistent thing and pull out of the ANZUS alliance. For whether you are snuggling up to the bomb or living in the peaceful shadow of the bomb, New Zealand benefits, sir, and that's the question with which we charge you, and that's the question with which we would like an answer, sir.
And I'm going to give it to you if you hold your breath just for a moment. I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it. I think it's, we in New Zealand, you know, used to be able to relax a bit, to be able to think that we would sit comfortably while the rest of the world, seared, singed, withered, were enraptured. And the fact is that we used to have this vision of our being some kind of an Antipodean Noah's Ark, which would, from within its quite isolated preserves, spawn a whole new world of realistic humankind. Now, the fact is that we know that that is not achievable. We know that if the nuclear winter comes, we freeze, we join the rest of you. And that means that there is now a total denouement as far as any argument in favour of moral purpose goes. It is a strange, dubious and totally unaccepted moral purpose which holds the whole of the world to ransom. Nuclear weapons are not needed. All the arguments which can be brought forward in support of this evil come to nothing in the fact of its ultimate irrelevance. I don't make that assertion because I have some simple South Pacific, as you put it, grand gesture answer to the question of the existence of nuclear weapons. All of you in Europe know that negotiating an end to nuclear weapons could hardly be more difficult. And then you have the hide to come here and say that New Zealand's stance is somehow threatening the strength of the West in Geneva. And then others criticise us because they say our position has not reduced by one the number of nuclear weapons in the world. You can't have it both ways. Either the West goes to Geneva girt about with the hardware it had a month ago, or it doesn't. And it does, and in that nuclear stare-out there will be a blink, I pray, and there can be a claim back. But you know, you can't wholeheartedly support the argument in favour of the superpowers negotiating control of them while nuclear powers embrace the logic of escalation.
So there are many of us here tonight who are very impressed by your courage and idealism. But on the other side of the house, from which I come, there are many of us indeed who cannot but remember that this debate is only taking place because hundreds of thousands of your fellow countrymen were prepared to give their lives so that we might live in freedom. And the accusation which those of us who would be your friends and supporters still must make against you is to express our skepticism that you are substituting idealism, a very fragile idealism, for the very secure reality that we have gained through long years of struggle. And I put that to you that that is the real subject we are debating tonight, and I would ask you to answer it.
It is. The simple fact is that I make no pretense that the problem which confronted New Zealand is the same as that which confronts Western Europe. And you point out, and you have the right to point out, and I'm glad that you did, notwithstanding that you allege that you oppose me, that people from New Zealand, a country which has never been attacked, have willingly taken up arms in Europe. They have died in African campaigns. They have their bones bleaching in deserts. They are buried in Italy. They have fought in Vietnam. We have forces right now in Sinai. We have a battalion in Singapore where the British used to be. And the fact is, we do not shrink from that responsibility. We never have, and we are not going to. The fact is that we do not choose. We do not choose to be unilateral armers. It makes absolutely no sense for a country to surround its waters or invite into its ports or country nuclear weapons when there is no balance to be achieved. The balance is there now, there are none.
say, don't you feel that you should weigh your moral stance? And I, for one, as an American, do not feel that we should shoulder the defense of the Western world. And I think it's something that everybody should contribute to, and you, sir, are not doing your part.
Well, I tell you that this country, New Zealand, is not going to contribute to a nuclear alliance. This country, New Zealand, never has. New Zealand was declared by the former government to be no part of a nuclear alliance, and we will pick up the tab by conventional defence. And one of the immoralities of nuclear weaponry, surely, is that it creates such a level of depersonalisation that the infinite capacity of destruction is unleashed by a few. We have a long history of being anti-nuclear. We proposed in '75 a South Pacific nuclear-free zone. We are going to work to perfect that this year. And you know, one of the amazing things about expectations of world governments is that first, they assume that an opposition's policy is infinitely flexible, and then they immediately assume that when you get into government, you'll do a U-turn. Well, we are not infinitely flexible, and we've done no U-turn, and we've done exactly what we said we would do, and that, of course, is terribly destabilising, because it makes it so difficult to read all the signs. But what essentially has happened is a demonstration of how nuclear weapons have assumed a moral life of their own. We have not given comfort to the Soviet bloc. We have not undermined the West. But the result has been that we have been told by some officials in the United States administration that our decision is not, as they put it, to be cost-free. We are actually told that New Zealanders cannot decide for themselves how to defend New Zealand, but are obliged to adopt the methods which others use to defend themselves. To compel an ally to accept nuclear weapons against the wishes of that ally is to take the moral position of totalitarianism, which allows for no self-determination and which is exactly the evil that we're supposed to be fighting against. Rejecting the logic of nuclear weapons does not mean surrendering to evil. Evil must still be guarded against. Rejecting nuclear weapons is to assert what is human over the evil nature of the weapon. It is to restore to humanity the power of decision. It is to allow a moral force to reign supreme. It stops the macho lurch into mutual madness. And for me, the position of my country is a genuine, long-term affirmation of this proposition, that nuclear weapons are morally indefensible, and I support that proposition.
A standing ovation from here in the Oxford Union for the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Mr. David Lange.
They've taken him to their hearts. They like the guy, and they've obviously, many of them, anyway, approved of his arguments. I think Falwell's got a lot to do, but I've seen in this House many times people come back from a much more difficult situation than this and roll it back and win it.
I thank the Prime Minister of New Zealand very much for that speech. And it now gives me great pleasure to call upon the Reverend Jerry Falwell, leader of the moral majority.
He is the pastor of the Thomas Road Baptist Church in Lynchburg, Virginia, and known to millions of Americans from his Sunday broadcast on 400 television stations called the Old Time Gospel Hour, the Reverend Jerry Falwell.
Honored guests, members of this union, Mr. Prime Minister, I have not come here to represent the President of the United States, and if he is looking in, he well knows that. Nor have I come here to alienate my good friends in New Zealand, where I plan to spend our family vacation next summer. And I don't want 70 million sheep and 3.25 million New Zealanders mad at me. It is a great honor for a little insignificant Baptist preacher, Mr. President, from Virginia, one of your first colonists, to come to this prestigious debating society. And I'm sure you want me to say the most prestigious debating society in the world, and I say it. And when this thing is all over, my New Zealanders will not be mad at me, because I'm a Baptist preacher and I can't go so far as to say damn it. I can only say doggone it and things like that. But the words of this so newly minted resolution, which have not changed since this morning, I noticed, began the Western nuclear defense alliance is morally indefensible. 2 days ago, it became all nuclear weapons are morally indefensible. It is very important, I think, to say, first of all, that it is not David and Goliath here tonight. The Prime Minister is larger than I am. It is not the United States versus New Zealand. It is not the Western Alliance versus New Zealand. I believe that New Zealand has been and is, and I hope ever shall be, a trusted and beloved ally of the West, and certainly we feel that way in our country. And I have a feeling that the Prime Minister and I, if we had long enough to socialize a bit, we'd get to like each other. Ted Kennedy and I are friends. Nothing's impossible. And we do agree on abortion, I understand. I heard that at the dinner table tonight. That's a start. I think that the issue clearly is it moral to possess and threaten the use of nuclear weapons, period or question mark? And I am here to propose that it is moral if there are certain extenuating circumstances that do in fact exist in our society today. In reality, I think the drafters of the resolution were asking the question, may Western civilization and its values be morally defended? That is really the bottom line of what we're talking about here tonight. We all wish, every one of us, that we could turn the clock back 40 or 50 years. No one in this room, including the Prime Minister, believes that the Soviets intend to dispose of their arsenal in the foreseeable future, or rewrite their Marxist-Leninist philosophy, which basically states that they are called of God, whom they don't believe in, to save the world by dominating. Prime Minister Thatcher recently said that the Soviets are trying to divide us in the West. Abraham Lincoln once said that a house divided against itself cannot stand. And regardless what we think about it here tonight, we are a part of the same household. We may not all agree on all the same things, but we are, in fact, a member of the household of the free, each and every one of us. We are a diminishing breed, but we are nevertheless free. We are cocky and nationalistic and colloquial, and we are often cynical and sectarian, as has been demonstrated here tonight. Our freedoms are all intertwined. None of us can make it without the rest of us. None of us is invincible. There are no invincible players in this partnership. And we're not saying that the Western Alliance is the cure-all of all the problems of the total world, but we are saying that it's the best idea that human beings have come up with in my lifetime. And the fact is that we have not had war in this continent, the United States, inside the Western Alliance for the past 40 years. It is the ability to deter a hostile aggressor from carrying out evil intentions that has allowed us to come here one more time in this very wonderful place and talk as we wish and say what we believe and do all the things that we're doing here tonight in the name of liberty. Yes?
Given all this, Mr. Falwell, and given how close you feel to New Zealand and how much you trust that country in the United States, is it not astonishing, therefore, that you've threatened and you've said you're willing to cut off all intelligence information and protection to that country?
You talking to me or the President?
Well, it's the same thing these days.
No, it's not the same thing.
Because they would not bow to American power.
First of all, I sincerely hope, I'm speaking for Jerry Falwell. I haven't come here to advocate any kind of reprisal by anybody against the Prime Minister of New Zealand. No one can think those old men in the Kremlin are stupid, and they, in my estimate, I have a great respect for the intelligence of those leading every nation in the world tonight, and I admit to the fact that I'm a Christian with a belief in the sovereignty of God. We have observed since 1917
how basic freedoms and personal liberties seem to disappear when the Soviets are in power. Eastern Europe, Afghanistan, Asia, Africa, now in Latin America. Which side of the room are you coming from now?
Mr. Falwell, I am delighted to meet you, a man whom I have always regarded as the Reverend Ian Paisley of the Sunbelt. And despite...
Who is he?
Sir, he is the Ayatollah Khomeini of Northern Ireland. But may I just say to you that despite my enormous respect for your moral character, may I just express to you a very slight, teeny skepticism on behalf of the serried ranks of Oxford students when we consider the daily misery that your moral views and the serried ranks of rednecks whom you represent when we consider the misery that your views impose upon the ordinary moral lives of many people in your country, we are slightly skeptical about whether or not you really believe in allowing freedom to those who disagree with you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Believing very deeply, sir, in your sincerity and in your Christian kindness and your great character and all the rest, I will let the question stand. The resolution here tonight I oppose simply because it fails to recognize a number of things. Number one, it fails to recognize the harsh realities of the past 68 years of Soviet history. Realities which include purges and repressions, gross and massive violations of human rights, brutal aggression of every kind, perpetual abrogation of treaties and alliances, etc. The second consideration that I think has been ignored is that the resolution carried to its ultimate conclusion calls for unilateral disarmament. Not unilateral freeze, but unilateral disarmament by the West. And further, it denies Western nations any rights to effectively defend their freedoms and values from communist aggressors, but places no such restraint on communist nations. Prime Minister Thatcher recently said to a joint session of the U.S. Congress that the Soviets did not come back to Geneva because they have a lot of goodwill about it, want to see peace on the earth, decided to stop their aggressive actions. They came back because of the strength and the resolve of the West. And I say amen to that. And I wish we had a Mrs. Thatcher to succeed Mr. Reagan in 1988 in America. And to me it is very immoral to assume that my children, I brought my son Jonathan with me tonight so I'd get at least one vote. I would say that it's absolutely immoral for us in our society when we look at the slavery and the communist domination in places not just like Afghanistan, but all of the Eastern Bloc nations. It seems to me that it is immoral for us not to guarantee that they do in fact have the liberties that we now enjoy. To say that to possess weapons without a threatened use of them in the event of securing one's freedom and securing one's defense is the same as not having those weapons. If I were to have a gun in my house but tell a burglar en route to hurt my family that I have a gun but I'm a pacifist and won't use it, I might as well not have it. Yes.
You call yourself a God-fearing Christian. You also seem to hold half the population of the world in disdain. Can you say then that your morality is consistent with your Christianity? Because if you say you can, I would hold that your morality is slightly out of tune.
What part of the world do you...
Sir, that anything you would say about the morality of nuclear weapons cannot be held as acceptable.
What part of the world do you feel I hold in disdain?
The Eastern Bloc and the communist countries.
Well, you'd be happy to know, maybe you wouldn't be happy to know, that we have been for all these years, since it has been an Eastern Bloc, working in Christian ministry inside those Eastern Bloc nations. We have been putting food on the tables of refugees inside those nations. I would add Cambodia, we'd soon be adding Ethiopia, etc. As a matter of fact, I would ask you, are you a God-fearing Christian? And I would ask you where you're doing your work, but I won't, of course. Now, as a minister of the gospel, I do long for the day when nuclear weapons will no longer exist. And I believe that negotiations are necessary. I am glad we're going to the table. I think that the proper achievement of the goals we have on both sides of the fence here tonight will be done exactly the way the West is doing it right now. Solzhenitsyn said, it is not the choice of being either red or dead. To be red is to be dead, but only more slowly. And our own President Franklin D. Roosevelt, right here at Oxford University, June 19, 1941, when you gave him the Doctor of Civil Laws degrees from this university, said, we, too, born to freedom and believing in freedom and willing to fight to maintain freedom, we and all others who believe as deeply as we do would rather die on our feet than to live on our knees. It is a fact that the empire has enough nuclear warheads to destroy every American city, every one of them, without exception. But it is also true that no one in America tonight goes to bed afraid of being nuked. Now, before you think, after you've had your spasm, I didn't say which empire. I wasn't speaking of the Soviet Empire, I was speaking of the British Empire. And the fact is that nobody in America tonight is afraid of the British Empire sending missiles over upon our shores. Why? Because in this country there is no warlike hostility against the United States. We have never feared that could happen, nor do we fear it tonight, nor do we fear it 20 years from now. The issue is not, are the weapons immoral? The issue is, are the people who have control of them possessing immoral intent? I say that morality and immorality are encased in the hearts of men. The Bible says that the heart of man is desperately wicked, and most of us in this room know that's true. And we again look at 68 years of Soviet history and we see what their intent is. Only the most naive person does not believe that world conquest is their ultimate goal. And for that reason, the Western Nuclear Alliance, I think, is morally necessary in order to ensure for all free nations that those evil intentions will not be translated into havoc and ruin in this part of our world. But I want to say to you that we have come to a time in history when the ability to put one's head in the sand and, like the ostrich, imagine that the nuclear weapons are not here, and that by ignoring them and pretending they don't exist and saying I don't want help and I don't want to give any, and at the same time stay in those alliances which are so very important to the existence of all members of the alliance, is just a little bit naive. Therefore, Mr. President, I wish to oppose the motion.
I can thank you by myself. Thank you very much. I don't need anyone else to thank you with me. Quiet, please. Quiet. We thank you in many ways, Reverend Jerry Falwell. Their way is hanging out a little blue flag. My way is to say thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to have both you and the Prime Minister of New Zealand here. Could I ask everyone to remain seated while I hand over the chair to the librarian and I escort our guests out tonight.
At the final moment there, a banner was unfurled from the gallery up here. Peter J., can you read that from here?
The word peace figures on it several times, but I don't think we should be distracted from that. I think that represents the activity of maybe a handful of people, whereas the great majority of people who've been here for the last, 3 hours, have been listening to a very formidable and fascinating debate, both students and distinguished visitors, right up to and including the Prime Minister of New Zealand and the Reverend Falwell, debating what is, from any point of view, one of the great issues of our time, the morality of nuclear weapons. We saw on one side coming out more and more clearly this tremendous preoccupation and anxiety people have about nuclear weapons, about their awesome power, about the morality of using them or even threatening to use them. On the other side, the equally passionate concern of people about the freedoms of the West, the threats which they believe the Soviet Union and its allies pose to the West, about our need to defend them, about the morality of using whatever weapons it takes to defend those liberties. And there are the two basic points of view.
It has taken 2 hours to tabulate the vote, and the chamber is almost empty now. The number of votes opposed to the motion that nuclear weapons are morally indefensible is 250, and the number of votes in favor of the motion is 298. So Prime Minister Lange and his team carry the motion by nearly 50 votes. And there you have another great confrontation on one of the most important, if not the most important issue of our time, nuclear weapons. On behalf of Peter J., my colleague, this is John Lawrence saying good night from the Oxford Union.